Welcome back to the top 100 trades in NBA history. We're back now with part 4, the final part of the series. In this video, we'll be going over the top 25. If you want to see the trades that led up to this point, I recommend you check out parts 1 through 3. With that being said, let's dive right into it. At number 25, we have the deal that sent Dennis Rodman to the Bulls. At this point, Rodman was 34 years old, had never averaged more than 10 points per game in a single season, and had developed a reputation for being a hothead, and even a locker room cancer because his time in San Antonio gave him a really bad rap. Overall, teams just did not know if they could trust Rodman on or off the court, so by 1995, his trade value reached an all-time low, which is usually the perfect time to trade for a player. For these reasons, the Bulls got Dennis Rodman in a 1-for-1 swap, and all they sent was Will Perdue. Yes, trading for Rodman was a risk, but this package was still laughably cheap, especially when considering Rodman was still the best rebounder in the league, and that continued during his time with the Bulls, because in all 3 of his seasons with the Bulls, he led the league in rebounds per game, averaging 15 a night. Also, in Rodman's first year there, the Bulls won 72 games and won their 4th championship of the 1990s. Adding Rodman literally made this Bulls team the greatest team in NBA history at that point. This Bulls team would win the championship in all 3 of Rodman's years there before Michael Jordan retired. And this is in large part due to the fact that Dennis Rodman knew how to play his role beautifully on this Bulls team, never averaging more than 6 points per game for the Bulls, but always grabbing incredible rebounds and playing tenacious defense. So this deal is great not because Dennis Rodman was an all-star level scorer, but because his hustle was an inextricable part of the Bulls' identity in the late 90s. And the Bulls added 3 championship banners to the rafters to show for it. At the number 24 spot, we have Anthony Davis to the Lakers. At this point, the Lakers were 1 year removed from acquiring LeBron James, but this Lakers team failed to make it to the playoffs because the roster was just not constructed correctly around LeBron James and his skill set. Meanwhile, Anthony Davis had spent the entirety of his career in New Orleans since 2012, and continually this team failed to make the playoffs, and even when they did, they didn't see much success. So at this point, it was time for a rebuild in New Orleans. So the Lakers pulled the trigger on a deal to send Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, 3 first-round picks, a pick swap, and cash to the Pelicans for Anthony Davis. Now this move was a risk because the Lakers were basically giving up the entirety of their depth and young talent in order to land Anthony Davis. Their third option was literally Kyle Kuzma. However, as we all know, LeBron James is capable of carrying a pretty heavy load, and Anthony Davis for sure held up his own weight because the Lakers won the championship in 2020, and Anthony Davis was the leader in points for the entire 2020 playoffs. And to show how this trade worked out, just look at the box score stats for the 2020 finals, because LeBron averaged 30, Anthony Davis averaged 25, and the next highest scorer was Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. So the Lakers literally surrendered all their depth in order to get a co-star for LeBron, and as you can see by the fact that they won the championship, it was the right move. Anthony Davis was also the runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year in 2020, showing that he brought it on both ends of the ball. So not only did the Lakers get a co-star for LeBron, but they got a defensive anchor big man centerpiece, which was exactly what they needed. Speaking of big man, at number 23 we have Shaquille O'Neal to the Heat. This is another trade that involves the acquisition of a co-star, and it's also another trade that led to a championship in its aftermath. Except in this deal, a veteran Shaquille O'Neal was paired with a young rising star, Dwayne Wade. This comes after the falling out between Kobe and Shaq, who were wildly successful on the court, but had battles off of the court. So after multiple titles and an MVP 4 years earlier, Shaquille O'Neal had to leave LA. So the Heat pulled the trigger. In order to get Shaq, they traded away Lamar Odom, Caron Butler, Brian Grant, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick. Even though Shaq was 32 at this point, in his first season with the Heat, he was the runner-up for the MVP award in a year where the Heat were 1 game away from the NBA Finals. Then the next year, the Heat won the championship in a year where Dwayne Wade exploded into a superstar talent, and Shaq definitely took more of a backseat role this year, especially in the finals. However, Shaq was still the dominant co-star that Wade needed, and he made the All-NBA first team as a result. Even though Shaq only spent 3.5 seasons with Miami, that's all it took for this trade to be remarkably worth it, especially given the cheap package that it took to land him. And for that reason, the Miami Heat were able to secure their first championship in franchise history. At our next spot, we have Pau Gasol to the Lakers. This seems to be an area of the ranking where trades that involve the acquisition of a co-star or second best player are being ranked. And these types of trades are important because there's far too many examples of stars or superstar talents that spent their prime years either missing the playoffs or being bested in the first or second round due to the front office's inability to build a contending roster around their star. This was exactly the position the Lakers were in after trading away Shaq in 2004. Kobe needed help, so the Lakers traded away Marc Gasol, Kwame Brown, Aaron McKie, Javaris Crittenton, 2 first-round picks, and cash to land Pau Gasol and a second-round pick. This was looked at as one of the worst trades in NBA history at the time for the Grizzlies, although Marc Gasol turned out to be a pretty good player for them. But the Lakers aren't complaining. Out of Pau, they got 3 All-NBA team appearances, a second option for Kobe, and most importantly, 2 NBA championships in 2009 and 2010. And Pau's elite big man play translated excellently to the playoffs, making this move a championship difference maker. At number 21, we have Gary Payton to the Supersonics, probably the greatest player in Supersonics franchise history before they relocated to Oklahoma City. Gary Payton is one of the best two-way guards the league has ever seen, as he made the all-defensive first team 9 years in a row, but also averaged 18 points and 7 assists in his 12.5 years that he spent with the Supersonics. Payton was the Sonics' franchise centerpiece ever since they drafted him in 1990. But they wouldn't have been able to draft him if the year before they didn't trade away their starting big man Alton Lister to the Warriors in exchange for their first round pick in 1990. Even though the Warriors ended up winning 37 games the next season, this pick shot up to the number 2 overall pick even though it was supposed to be number 10. With the pick, the Sonics drafted Gary Payton, the man who would go on to run their offense as a scorer and a playmaker, while also being a Defensive Player of the Year level defender, an award he won in 1996. These Sonics rosters he led were some of the best Western Conference teams of the 1990s, being just 1 game away from the NBA Finals in 1993 and 2 games away from the NBA Championship in 1996, in a year where they went against the 72-10 Bulls and gave them a run for their money. Although you could call it draft lottery luck, the Warriors learned a good lesson here about the dangers of trading away your first round pick. Coming up at the number 20 spot, we have Charles Barkley to the Suns. Barkley already made this ranking in part 3 when the draft pick that was used to draft him was traded to the Sixers, and Barkley spent 8 years in Philly developing a reputation as one of the best power forwards in basketball, but not having much playoff success with the team. So Barkley requested a trade, and the Suns were the team to bite. They traded away Jeff Hornacek, Andrew Long, and Tim Perry to the Sixers in order to land him. In hindsight, this was a remarkably cheap package, especially when considering that Barkley led the Suns to a 62-win season in his first year there, winning the MVP award, and also making the NBA Finals with the team, being 2 games away from taking down the Michael Jordan-led Bulls and winning the championship. So just from the season alone, it's pretty insane that the Suns didn't have to give up a face of the franchise level guy or even a first round pick. After this year, Barkley spent another 3 seasons in Phoenix, and neither Barkley nor the Suns had a season as great as they did in 1993. But from this deal, they got the greatest single season peak in their franchise history, probably to this day, and they did so by acquiring him for a relatively inexpensive package. Now at the number 19 spot, we have Moses Malone to the Rockets. It's pretty rare to see a team trade for a guy that later wins the MVP award, and it's even more rare to see a team trade for a guy that wins the award twice. But that's exactly what Moses Malone did in Houston, averaging 25 points and 18 rebounds when he won it in 1979, and averaging 31 points and 15 rebounds when he won it in 1982. What's almost as impressive as his play in Houston is the package that it took to acquire him, as they traded away their 1977 and 1978 first-round pick in order to get him, before he was an established name in the league. Well, less than 2 years later, Moses Malone won the MVP award, marking his name as one of the most dominant centers in the NBA. And this Rockets team was no joke either. Moses Malone led them to the NBA Finals in 1981, and they were 2 games away from taking down the Larry Bird-led Celtics and bringing home the trophy, a year in which Malone led the entire NBA in most points and rebounds scored in the playoffs. With Houston, Malone developed his reputation as one of the best scorers in the league and one of the most dominant rebounders to ever play basketball, because in every full season he played with the Rockets, he led the league in offensive rebounds per game. Overall, Malone's years in Houston were some of the most impressive big men prime years that we've seen in basketball, which makes the move to acquire him before his potential was known all the more impressive. The next trade we have is Kawhi Leonard to the Spurs. While we know Kawhi today as one of the best small forwards of the 21st century, this reputation was not expected or built until he proved himself in the NBA, because he wasn't even a lottery pick coming into the draft. The Pacers drafted him number 15 overall in 2011. There was a team that saw something special in him though, and that team was the San Antonio Spurs. In 2011, they traded away George Hill to the Pacers in order to get Kawhi Leonard, Davis Bertans, and Erasem Lorbeck. The Spurs seriously liked Kawhi as a prospect. Greg Popovich reluctantly parted with George Hill in order to get Kawhi, and this Spurs team usually does not build their team off trades. In fact, I'm pretty sure this is their first appearance on the ranking. But Kawhi developed into a better player year after year, winning the Defensive Player of the Year award in 2015, and then winning it again in 2016 while also being the runner-up for the MVP award. But that wasn't even Kawhi's best year with the Spurs, because in 2017, Kawhi led the Spurs to a 61-win record while also averaging a career-high 25.5 points per game while still playing elite defense on the other end of the ball. And this was the most playoff success that the Spurs saw with Kawhi as their leader, as they made it to the conference finals before losing to the Super Team Warriors, a team that no team was going to be able to beat. It's okay though, because in his 3rd year in the league, a 22-year-old Kawhi Leonard already won the championship and the Finals MVP award for helping take down the LeBron James-led Heat. So there's no doubt that Kawhi is one of the greatest players in Spurs franchise history, and with this deal, the Spurs predicted this potential before any other team did. At our next spot, we're going to have Dominique Wilkins to the Hawks. At this point in the ranking, you're going to have to do a lot to rank highly on this list if you haven't won a championship with the team you were traded to. Fortunately, from a franchise's perspective, being nicknamed the human highlight reel and spending over a decade with your team before making the Hall of Fame is a pretty good makeup for not winning a title. Dominique Wilkins was one of the most dominant scorers and exciting athletes of the 1980s, and this potential was well known going into the 1982 NBA draft, as he was drafted number 3 overall by the Utah Jazz. But Dominique Wilkins refused to play there because they wanted him as a power forward and he wanted to play small forward. Also, the Jazz were having cash flow issues at this point, so they sent him away in a deal that got them John Drew, Freeman Williams, and $1 million cash. The 2 players they got combined for just 4 seasons spent in Utah. Meanwhile, by his 4th year in the league, Dominique Wilkins won the scoring title and was the runner-up for the MVP award. That was his best year in Atlanta, but in the 11.5 years that he spent there, Dominique Wilkins was no stranger to averaging 30 points a night, and also led this Hawks team to multiple 50-win seasons, although they were in a really stacked Eastern Conference and never saw much playoff success. Still, Dominique made 9 All-Star appearances and was the face of the Hawks franchise for over a decade. And that, mixed with the fact that they got him for such a remarkably cheap package, is what makes this deal so lopsided. To this day, Dominique leads the Hawks franchise in points scored for his career, and between him and Bob Pettit, he's arguably the greatest player in Hawks franchise history. Trades don't get much better than that. Next, at number 16, we have Kevin Garnett to the Celtics. This is one of the 2 big moves the Celtics made in the 2007 offseason to push for a title, the other move being for Ray Allen, which we talked about in part 3. But here we have a guy who won the MVP award 3 years earlier and had already developed a reputation as one of the best big men in the league, but somehow still they got him for a package that was remarkably cheap. They traded away Gerald Green, Al Jefferson, 3 players, and 2 first-round picks in order to get him. This and the Ray Allen trade turned the Celtics around from a 24-win team to a 66-win team, with Kevin Garnett being an MVP candidate, the Defensive Player of the Year, and the Finals MVP, as the Celtics won their first title in over 20 years. This was still to this day the greatest single-season franchise turnaround we've ever seen. Kevin Garnett was the primary reason for this. Also, he shattered all conversations about whether or not he was capable of winning a championship. This team competed for several more years, with the team making the finals again in 2010, and Garnett was happy to settle into a reduced role where he didn't have to carry as heavy as an offensive load as he did in Minnesota. But he still made 5 All-Star appearances and was still one of the best defensive big men in the league. Landing a guy like this for so cheap when he becomes such an intense competitor and transformative player for your roster is still mind-blowing to this day, and because of the 2008 NBA championship, Celtics fans will never forget this trade. At number 15, we have James Worthy to the Lakers. The pickup that helped the Lakers win 3 championships in the 1980s. And yes, they also did have Magic and Kareem, 2 of the 10 best players to ever play basketball. But Worthy was the star wing that this roster needed. He played and fit into his role in the Showtime Lakers offense excellently, and for that reason, he made 7 straight All-Star appearances during his prime. Now, the move that helped the Lakers get him was actually 2 years before he was drafted, when the Cavs traded away Butch Lee and their first-round pick in 1982 to get Don Ford and a first-round pick in 1980. Now, I don't know exactly what the Cavs had in mind here, because in the 1982 season, they only won 15 games, and they didn't even have their first round pick. But this is what allowed the Lakers to draft Worthy number 1 overall, despite being the defending champions and winning 2 championships in the past 3 years. And there would be more to come after this trade, because Worthy seemed to play even better on the biggest stage of basketball than in the regular season. For instance, in the 1988 playoffs, Worthy scored the most points in the NBA Finals and playoffs, while Worthy brought home the Finals MVP and his 3rd championship of his career, and the Lakers brought home their 5th championship of the decade. Again, this trade is another lesson to GMs to be really careful when you're trading away your first round pick, because all this trade did was fuel a team that was already shaping up to be a dynasty, and it got the Cavs basically nothing in return. At number 14, we have James Harden to the Rockets. A really rare example of a modern trade in which a team picks up a guy that later becomes one of the best players in the league, but prior to the trade was not seen as having that level of talent. Before this trade, Harden was coming off of a year in which he won the 6th Man of the Year award on a young Thunder team that made it all the way to the NBA Finals. And even though Harden was improving every year, the Thunder did not want to spend the money that it would take to sign him to a contract extension. So instead, they traded away James Harden, Cole Aldridge, Daquan Cook, and Lazar Hayward to the Rockets in exchange for Kevin Martin, Jeremy Lamb, 2 first-round picks, and a second-round pick. Harden would go on to become one of the most dominant guards of the 21st century, bringing home an MVP award in 2018. He also had 3 straight scoring titles between 2018 and 2020. He led the league in assists per game in 2017, and also led the league in free throws and free throws attempted per game for 7 out of his 8 first years with the Houston Rockets. Harden was a free throw merchant, but he was also an elite isolation scorer and really knew how to run an offense with his playmaking. This Rockets team was one of the best teams of the Western Conference in the 2010s. Although they never made it to the finals, they were really close in Harden's MVP year 2018, just minutes away from making it actually. But in an unfortunate stroke of luck, Chris Paul, the second best player on this Rockets team, got injured in Game 6. But still, we're talking about a guy who averaged as much as 36 points a night for the Rockets and as much as 11 assists per game. He built his legacy in Houston as one of the best offensive guards to ever play basketball. And he did so because the Rockets believed in him at a time when the Thunder did not. Now at number 13, we have Elvin Hayes to the Bullets. We talked about Charles Barkley being one of the greatest power forwards to ever play the game. And Elvin Hayes is also somebody that is one of the best at this position, and he spent 9 out of the 16 years in his career playing in Washington, many of these years being his prime years and his most memorable moments of his career. To be fair though, prior to being traded to the Bullets, Elvin Hayes had already proven himself to be one of the best big men in the league, He literally had the scoring title in his rookie year and made the All-Star game all 4 of his first 4 seasons of his career. But Hayes wasn't getting along with the Rockets head coach Tex Winter, so he got shipped to Washington in exchange for Jack Marin in a 1-for-1 swap. This deal paired Hayes with former MVP Wes Unseld, and together they would go on to make 3 finals appearances in the 1970s and win the title in 1978. And Wes Unseld won the finals MVP, but if you look at the box score, I have no idea why they gave it to him over Elvin Hayes or really anybody else on this roster. But Elvin Hayes was still a pivotal piece on this Bullets roster that was consistently competing for championships. He made 8 All-Star appearances in a row with Washington. He also was an MVP candidate twice and made the All-NBA first team 3 times. So this deal gave the Bullets excellent value. They traded in a 1-for-1 swap for a guy who would become one of the best to ever play his position. At number 12, we have Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish to the Celtics. This is a really unique trade, probably one of the most unique ones in the ranking, because normally it takes multiple years to build the fabric of a championship roster, trades, draft picks, even free agency in the modern age. But what we see with this deal is the Celtics picking up 2 multiple-time All-Stars that would spend over a decade with the Celtics, both of them. And they did this by trading back from the number 1 overall pick in 1980. They also traded the 13th overall pick and got Robert Parrish and the 3rd overall pick, which they used to draft Kevin McHale. McHale proved to be a much better prospect than the number 1 overall pick, Joe Barry Carroll. He spent the entire 13 years of his career with the Celtics, racking up 7 All-Star appearances, and his best year came in 1987 when he averaged 26 points a game and led the league in field goal percentage, despite his high volume of scoring. Robert Parrish, who was 27 when the Celtics picked him up, ended up playing in Boston until he was 40 years old, racking up 9 All-Star appearances during that stretch. And together with Larry Bird and Dennis Johnson, this Celtics team won 3 championships in the 1980s and played some of the best basketball we've ever seen. This move ranks second all-time for the most combined All-Star appearances picked up in a single trade, with 16 combined All-Star appearances. Number 1 has 18, which we'll talk more about at the number 2 spot. So for fast-tracking the process of constructing a championship roster, this trade is a unique example of an elite trade. Now at number 11, we have Wilt Chamberlain to the Lakers. At this point when the Lakers traded for him, Wilt had just won 3 MVP awards in a row, but for several personal reasons, Wilt wanted out of Philly, one of them being that he wanted to sleep with white women and that was more acceptable in LA than in other places, which is pretty funny. So Philly respected his wishes, they traded him to the Lakers and got Darryl Imhoff, Jerry Chambers, and Archie Clark. It's crazy that this is what it cost to get a 4-time MVP back then. This Lakers roster that had constantly struggled to win a championship was finally able to get over the hump with Wilt. They had to suffer a few heartbreaks first, losing in Game 7 back-to-back years in the finals in 1969 and 1970. But finally in 1972 they won 69 games and the championship. And Wilt was the finals MVP. He averaged 19 points, 23 rebounds, and played 47 minutes a night during this series. Wilt's elite big man play is exactly what this Lakers roster needed to get over the hump. And because of this deal, the local Jerry West won his first championship of his career. Very necessary trade here. And breaking into the top 10, at number 10 we have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to the Thunder. This trade is already among the greatest packages ever received for trading away a star player, up there with the number 9 spot, which we'll talk about next. When the Thunder traded for Paul George, they traded away Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis, who became multiple-time All-Stars for Indiana. So that wasn't great, but in the long run, I guess it worked out because they sent Paul George to the Clippers in exchange for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, 5 first-round picks, one of which turned into Jalen Williams, and a first-round pick swap. If you're a fan of the NBA, you know what comes next. Last year, Shai won the scoring title, the MVP, the championship, and the finals MVP all in the same year. In the finals, the second leading scorer was Jalen Williams, who averaged 24 in the series. And he also made his first All-Star appearance last year, and he was drafted in 2022 with one of the many first-round picks the Clippers traded away in this deal. So in my eyes, even though this trade is only 7 years old, winning the championship this past year has solidified it as one of the 10 greatest trades in NBA history. The other greatest package received for trading away a star player is the deal that brought Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to the Celtics. We talked about Kevin Garnett on the Celtics and the big impact he made on that team. Well, by 2013, Kevin Garnett was 36, Paul Pierce was 35, and Ray Allen was gone. So it didn't look like this Celtics team had much left in the tank. However, there was still a team willing to buy up what they had left. The Celtics traded Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, Jason Terry, DJ White, a first-round pick and a second-round pick to the Nets. And the Celtics got 5 players that we don't need to mention and 4 first-round picks, the most important of them being in 2016 and 2017. Now, I don't know what the Nets were thinking because eventually Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce got too old to play basketball. The Nets didn't win any championships or come close to it really, and they were rebuilding by 2016, the year that the Celtics drafted Jaylen Brown number 3 overall using the Nets pick. And the year after, the Nets pick was the number 1 overall pick, which the Celtics used to trade down and draft Jason Tatum, as we talked about in part 3. And the 2018 pick that the Nets traded to the Celtics was used in the deal to pick up Kyrie Irving, although this era of Celtics basketball didn't really work out. Regardless, the Celtics have been profiting from this trade long after it was made. In 2024, 11 years after this trade was made, the Celtics won 64 games and the championship with a roster built around the 2 guys that they drafted as a result of this trade. The Celtics to this day are racking up 60-win seasons and are continuing to compete for championships. And they're able to do so because over a decade ago, the Nets so foolishly agreed to trade away their draft picks, and the Celtics took advantage of this opportunity and turned these draft picks into the 2 faces of their franchise. Now at number 8, we have Julius Erving to the 76ers. This move comes after Julius Erving won 3 straight MVPs in the ABA, but it also comes after the ABA disbanded, well, really merged with the NBA. But when Erving's team, the New York Nets, came to the NBA, the Knicks charged him with a $4.8 million fee for, quote, invading their territory. And in case you're wondering, since this was 50 years ago, that would be worth $26.5 million today. So the Nets were in a bit of a financial pickle. They actually offered the Knicks Erving's contract in order to void the fee, but the Knicks said no, making for one of the worst trades declined in NBA history. So instead, the Sixers gave them $6.6 million in order to get Julius Erving. Which, yes, for the era is actually a lot of money, but Julius Erving would go on to spend the last 11 years of his career in Philly, and he made the All-Star game every single year. Despite switching leagues, Erving was still one of the best players in the league, winning the MVP award again in 1981, and with Erving, the Sixers were constantly competing for championships. They were 2 games away from winning the title in Erving's first year there, and the same goes for 1980 and 1982. And finally, in 1983, they took down the Lakers and won their first championship with Erving on the squad. So even though they spent over $36 million in today's money to get him, I think they got their money's worth. Wilt Chamberlain shows up on this list again for when he was sent to the 76ers. Before this deal, a rookie Wilt Chamberlain had already broken the record for the most expensive contract ever given to a player, which was $30,000 by the way. And he already secured the scoring title in all 5 of his first 5 years in the NBA, proving himself to be an absolutely unstoppable big man, the likes of which the league had never seen before. So you'd think it would cost a lot to get him. Instead, in 1965, the Sixers traded Connie Deerking, Paul Newman, Lee Schaffer, and Cash in order to land Wilt. Wilt would go on to win 3 straight MVPs with Philly, and when they hired coach Alex Hannum, Wilt reinvented his game to be more of a passing big, which worked beautifully, and the Sixers won 68 games in Hannum's first year coaching the team, and the NBA title, Wilt's first. So not only did they pick up the most dominant player in the league, but they reshaped his skill set to make him a championship level player, and all while acquiring him for next to no valuable assets. Now at number 6, we have Scottie Pippen to the Bulls. Yes, the man who made 7 All-Star appearances and won 6 championships with the Dynasty Bulls was traded there. They really liked Pippen as a prospect going into the 1987 NBA draft, so they traded the 8th pick Olden Polinis, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick. And in return, they got the 5th overall pick Scottie Pippen and a first-round pick in 1989. There's a reason you haven't heard of Olden Polinis. He never averaged more than 5 points per game for Seattle. Meanwhile, Pippen would go on to become the Robin to Michael Jordan's Batman, as the Bulls would go on to rule the NBA through the 1990s. Although, it may not be fair to call him Robin because in Michael Jordan's absence in 1994, Scottie Pippen was an MVP candidate and led this Bulls team to being one game away from the conference finals. So no doubt, Pippen was a superstar talent in his own right. He was a stud on both ends of the court, averaging as much as 22 points a game, and also probably being the greatest defensive player to never win the Defensive Player of the Year award. There's really not much more that needs to be said. Pippen was a perfect fit on this Bulls team that had so much success, and they rightly recognized his potential on draft night and made the right move to acquire him. Breaking into the top 5, we have Dirk Nowitzki to the Mavericks. Yes, the Dirk Nowitzki that spent over 20 years being the face of the Mavericks franchise, he was actually traded there. In an era where it was becoming more common to request trades, Dirk Nowitzki stayed loyal to Dallas, which makes him one of the most loyal superstars of the 21st century, up there with Tim Duncan. It's too bad the Bucks didn't see this though when they traded away the 9th pick Dirk Nowitzki and the 19th pick Pat Garrity to the Mavericks in exchange for the 6th pick Robert Traylor. They would go on to flip Pat Garrity for Steve Nash in a trade that we ranked 81st on the list, marking one of the greatest draft nights for a franchise the league has ever seen. Traylor was basically a draft bust, only spending 2 seasons in Milwaukee. Meanwhile, Dirk would rack up 14 All-Star appearances, 12 All-NBA teams, won the MVP in 2007, won the championship and the finals MVP in 2011, and to this day has the 6th most points scored in NBA history over his 21-year career, all of which he spent with the Mavericks. There's really much that can be said about Dirk in his career, but for the purposes of this video, we'll sum it up by saying that Dirk is one of the greatest power forwards to ever play the game, and for that reason, the draft day trade that brought him to Dallas was one of the most lopsided finesses the NBA has ever seen. Up next at the number 4 spot, we have Magic Johnson to the Lakers. Yes, the 3-time MVP, 5-time champion, greatest point guard of the 20th century was traded to the Lakers, basically, because in 1976, the Lakers' multiple-time All-Star Gail Goodrich wanted to sign with the New Orleans Jazz. But this was not an era of the NBA where free agency signings were encouraged. In fact, teams had to give up compensation to the other team when they signed their players. So when the Jazz signed Gail Goodrich, it turned into a trade where the Jazz got Gail Goodrich a first-round pick and a second-round pick. And the Lakers got 3 first-round picks, the most notable of which coming in 1979, and a second-round pick. You could say the Jazz got screwed by the league here, but you also have to remember that this was an already existing rule that you had to compensate teams for signing their players. So the Jazz were aware of this. What they weren't aware of is how to build a competitive roster, because in 1979, the Jazz were the worst team in the league, and this was the last first round pick they traded in this deal to the Lakers, so the pick was the number 1 overall pick in a year where Magic Johnson was the top prospect. Magic would go on to make an instant impact on the Lakers because in Game 6 of the NBA Finals in 1980, Kareem, the Lakers star, was injured, but Magic scored 42 points, 15 rebounds, and 7 assists, and led the Lakers to a Game 6 win, which won them the title and Magic Johnson's first Finals MVP as a rookie, which he would get 2 more of over his career as he won 5 championships in total. Because to this day, Magic is probably the greatest playmaker the league has ever seen. He engineered one of the most dominant offenses the league has ever seen, the Showtime Lakers of the 1980s. This trade is an unfortunate byproduct of the lack of free agency in the 1970s, but still, it created one of the greatest dynasties the league has ever seen, so maybe the Jazz should have passed on Goodrich. Now at number 3, we have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to the Lakers, Magic's co-star during the Showtime Lakers era. Kareem is a legend, one of the greatest players to ever play the game, and he was already beginning to build their reputation before the Lakers traded for him, because by 1975, Kareem had spent 6 years in the league and won 3 MVPs, 2 scoring titles, and had led the Milwaukee Bucks to their first franchise championship. However, it was also in 1975 that Kareem requested a trade, either to the New York Knicks or to Los Angeles. Sorry Knicks fans, you guys can't catch a break. The Lakers traded Junior Bridgman, Elmore Smith, Brian Winters, and Dave Myers to the Bucks in order to get Kareem. Kareem would go on to spend another 14 years playing for the Lakers, racking up 13 All-Star appearances, 3 more MVP awards, and 5 championships alongside Magic Johnson. He was the Finals MVP for one of them in 1985. What's most impressive about this deal was Kareem's durability after playing for the Lakers. He stayed at an all-star level for about a decade and a half, and for that reason, he has the 3rd most points, the 2nd most rebounds, and the most blocks in Lakers franchise history, which, in hindsight, makes trading for Kareem more than worth it. I mean, they really gave up nobody here anyway. Trading in the 70s was way too easy. Now we're at the number 2 spot and we have Kobe Bryant to the Lakers, a trade that maybe many of you expected to be number 1. And no doubt, everything about this trade is flawless. From the cheap package to the fact that Kobe spent all 20 of his years in LA, making 18 All-Star appearances and winning 5 championships. Looking back to 1996 though, the Lakers liked Kobe as a prospect, and they wanted to free up some cap space to sign a free agent named Shaquille O'Neal. The Hornets were willing to make a deal, trading for their starting center Vlade Divac and giving them the 13th pick, Kobe Bryant. Not really thinking much of him as a prospect. Well, Divac was solid, but he was no Kobe Bryant. The Lakers would go on to win 3 championships with Kobe and Shaq as co-stars, and 2 more championships with Kobe as the lead star in 2009 and 2010. Other than being a winner, Kobe was one of the greatest scorers basketball has ever seen, winning 2 scoring titles and averaging 25 points over his 20-year career. He could score on all 3 levels, and he brought this elite level of play on both ends of the ball. He made 9 all-defensive first teams throughout his career. So there's few players that we have seen in basketball that would make for a better face of your franchise than Kobe Bryant. And the fact that all it took to get a guy like that was trading away a solid starter is still mind-blowing to this day. Rest in peace to a legend. If you have this trade number 1, I can't blame you. But at number 1, I have the trade that sent Bill Russell to the Celtics. What can I say for Bill Russell that his resume doesn't? 11 championships in his 13-year career, not to mention 5 MVP awards. To this day, we still haven't seen a guy, and may never see a guy, who was as great of a winner as Bill Russell was. And to this day, you cannot rank the greatest rebounders or defenders in NBA history without having Bill Russell on that list with respect to his era. But before all this happened, Bill Russell was drafted number 2 overall to the St. Louis Hawks, but he never played there for multiple reasons. For one, Red Auerbach, the Celtics coach, really liked Bill Russell and wanted him on his team at all costs. Also, the Hawks really wanted the Celtics' St. Louis native Ed McCauley, who was a 6-time All-Star at this point. Also, there's a theory out there that the Hawks didn't want Bill Russell because they wanted an all-white roster, which I can't prove or disprove, but either way, they ended up agreeing to a deal to send Bill Russell to the Celtics for Ed McCauley and Cliff Hagan. And as we know today, this trade changed NBA history as the Celtics would go on to win 11 championships due to Russell's winning brand of basketball and being a selfless guy that was willing to guard Wilt Chamberlain, the most unstoppable player in the history of basketball at that point, and doing a really excellent job. I mean, Wilt only won 1 championship during Bill Russell's career, so the reason why this trade is number 1 is obvious. It led to 11 championships. And I don't know if this trade will ever be surpassed, because I don't know if a trade will ever lead to this amount of championships ever again. But that's it for the top 100 trades in NBA history. If you've been here for all 4 parts, thank you for sticking around. And if you haven't seen parts 1 through 3, I recommend you check it out. We've been through a lot of trades. Be easy and keep loving basketball.